what I wanted to do this morning was thinking about it. Any word or testimony or opportunity that you've had to talk to somebody about the gospel or tell a Bible story. I'm focusing more on telling a Bible story. That's one critical thing that I'm always interested in, is not, as Jason said, it's not what you know, it's what your feet do. It's doing something. Now, sometimes over this last year, I've heard a couple of people say in a roundabout way, I just don't have the energy to do what I used to do. I've been thinking about that, is how I could counteract that. So far, I haven't run into anybody here that couldn't talk. If you can talk, you can pray. And that is the main thing that happens in the church to cause it to grow. Talking and praying. And over the years, I've been able to put together that you become like the people that you're around. So what I'd like to know, did anybody had any opportunity to say anything? I know y'all can't follow me around and watch me do it. So it's just me telling you what I've done, which I'm about to do in a minute. But I was just wondering, has anybody had any opportunity to make contact with a new person, pray with anybody, add anybody to your list, or say a good word to anybody?
I haven't talked to anybody new or whatever, but this morning before I left, I talked to my son Jeff. This past weekend, he was in Montgomery, Alabama at a men's conference. And I called to see how he was feeling, because I know before he left he wasn't feeling too good. But he said that he and his son-in-law were the three that went to this men's conference. And he said they really had some good things to say, and he enjoyed it tremendously. And he's going to talk to his pastor of ministries at his church to see if they can start a men's group sometime or some way, if they can fit it into their schedule. Because they gave them some, I guess, some ideas about things that they could do. But he said it's kind of like where the women have a conference. He said this is the men's side of it. Mm-hmm. So he was really excited about that. So I'd like for y'all to pray for him and the pastor and the church, and see if they can do that.
What's his name again?
Jeff.
Jeff.
Mm-hmm. It's my son. And I don't know the pastor of ministries name.
What church is that?
It's the Bridge. It's in Lebanon.
There was a pastor down the road here, not in, it's not in Lebanon, but it's down that direction. And they're reaching a lot of people, mm-hmm. and they have a lot of small groups. Mm-hmm. And the reason that they're doing that is because the pastor does that. Mm-hmm. And I'll be talking about that in just a minute. You become like the people you're around.
Well, Jeff and them, when they joined that church, they said that they had to meet with the pastor, I think, and they gave them certain things that they were interested in. He is in the security part of it, and there are certain Sundays that he talks about that he has to watch the cars in while they're having service, because they either go to an early service or late service, depending on when he has to work. And then I know that my granddaughter worked with nursery kids, the kids that were in the nursery, and Jeannie does something with a ladies group. I don't know what she does, but they're all involved, and that's the main thing. Mm-hmm. They're going and they're active and they're involved in things.
Well, when I went to Brentwood, they were looking for somebody to do the parking lot. And assimilation, I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, I don't want to park cars and I don't want to carry a gun, because that was part of the process. To parking the cars, you had to have a gun. I don't want to do that. And so I asked them, I said, would you mind if you will split that parking lot off of that? Because that was assimilation is what they wanted me to do. With evangelism and bringing people into the church to get them involved in somewhere. I said, I'll do that. And so they said, well, we'll pay you half time to do assimilation and the other half to do evangelism. I said, okay. But parking lot's not something I want to do, because I've seen those guys almost get run over by cars. That wasn't something I was interested in. But anyway, this last week, my son had his birthday, and we went up to Decatur. Did anybody else have anything? Before I started talking. So we went up to Decatur, and we went met them halfway. They live in Chelsea, Alabama, a bit south of Birmingham. And so we met halfway at Longhorn, and we had a server, and she evidently was new. She was quiet, but she just stopped in front of the table, which they usually don't do. They don't stop. But all the time had gone down. The people had left. It was about 3 o'clock, and so they were slowed down a little bit. And I asked her. I said, "What is your favorite Bible story?" Now that's extremely easy. That's usually my go-to thing, because I can learn a whole lot about a person by asking them, what is your favorite Bible story? I'll find out if they know anything about the Bible, if they go to church, if they have any kind of biblical background at all. And then I can also ask them about their pastor, and it's not offensive. Most people are not going to get offensive if you just ask them that real simple question. They'll ask you that. I asked a couple of the guys over here that were playing basketball one day. I asked him that question, and he started talking to me about where he went to church and why he went to church and what happened to him, but he didn't go to church, and they just started talking. Well, anyway, so I asked her. She said, I don't have one. I don't have a favorite Bible story. But she did do this. She made a terrible mistake when I asked her that. She said, what is your favorite Bible story?
Not good.
And I said, well, my favorite Bible story is Cain and Abel, and the creation and Adam and Eve. That's my favorite Bible story. I said, because every person in the whole world falls in either. I'll go ahead and tell you how I told it. Maybe you'll pick it up. Because everybody in the world is represented by either Cain or Abel. Everybody in the world is. I said God told both Cain and Abel to bring a sacrifice. Cain said, I'm going to do it my way. So he brought some vegetables, and he made his offering out of what he wanted to do. Abel did it God's way, and God accepted him, and God rejected Cain. Now that's the way it's been all the way from the day one. You either do it God's way or you do it man's way. And the second thing that's most important about Cain is that God said, Cain, if you will do it the way I ask you to, I'll accept you. All you have to do is do it the way I do. But Cain said, no, I am not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way. I want it my way. And that is the essence of sin, the essence of rebellion against God, is I do it my way. Abel did it God's way, and God accepted him. Now, it's not in this story, but it's over in another book of the Bible. It says that Abel was saved by faith. He was saved by faith. People will ask every once in a while, how were people in the Old Testament saved? Well, the New Testament tells us that the people in the Old Testament were saved just like people today. There's no difference. They were saved by faith. So, for instance, so you've got she wasn't in a hurry to leave. She just stood there. And so I figured, well, I'll just keep going. So you answer a question about how people were saved. A lot of people ask that in the Old Testament. I said they weren't saved by works. They were saved by faith, just like everybody else is. And the fact that God gave Cain a second chance means that he worked with Cain to let him know, you do it right and I'll accept you. And it's not hard, Cain. It's not hard. It's real easy. All you got to do is do what I say. And faith is doing what God tells. Now, we went on for about 10 minutes. And I could tell by looking at her that she was thinking. She wasn't in a hurry. It's almost we had to ask her for the bill. She just wasn't going to leave there and just kept talking. Now, I didn't ask her for a decision at that moment. I just didn't feel far enough along. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But what I want to do is two things. Is number one, encourage you to find a story that you like, and you got to practice it. You got to practice somehow or another. And Jerry Springer, who was the storyteller from the Foreign Mission Board, he's in Atlanta. You know him?
No, I thought you were talking about a different Jerry Springer.
Oh,
yeah. I thought, is he going to talk about throwing chairs or something?
Stringers.
Stringer, okay, a little different.
Stringer.
Big difference.
Mm-hmm.
He said, in order to tell a story good, you have to tell it bad the first time. So you don't make a mistake. He said, well, I'm going to start telling stories when I got it down right. Now, what I would like to do is move away a little bit, since, you know, Jason or somebody else is here is going to be doing the more of the spiritual thing. I want to take at least some time while I'm here and to do more practice every once in a while. That's something that I've asked Jonathan. I said, when is the last time y'all had a workshop? And been a while, hadn't it? Do what now?
No, it's been a long time. I don't think I've ever been with one here.
Any kind of workshop, Sunday school workshop, training union workshop, music workshop, you got to practice. And what we did when we were working on stories, we would tell a story. We would find a Bible verse, we'd read it for a while, and then we'd start at one end, said, you tell the story, you tell it, you tell it, you tell it, you go on around. Now, usually the first person that tells it is a little bit, you know, getting used to it. I mean, not the best. But by the time you get around to the last person, it's getting better and better. So the next time you do it, you start at the other end and you work around yourself that way. Now, you've got to get in a habit of telling the story. You have to get in a habit of doing something. It's just like doing music. Y'all practice ahead of time to get the bugs out, to get the sound system working right. If you just did that without any practice, it wouldn't work. The second thing I've learned is when you're doing evangelism, I used to hear this statement quite a bit. I heard myself say something that I've never said before. I've heard that a lot. And so I'm thinking, well, how am I going to overcome that? Well, we're going to practice. We're going to practice. I'm going to get you used to hearing it. You're going to hear it. And if you're not willing to stand in front of the mirror, you can stand in front of, if you're afraid to tell a story in front of friends and Christians, I doubt very seriously if you're going to tell a story in front of a lost person. If you're not going to tell a story in front of somebody that loves you and likes you and cares for you, you're going to have a real hard time telling it in front of a total stranger or somebody next door. So, to warn you, not every Wednesday, but once in a while, I want to do that. Now, because The only other option is to do what I hate to bring this up, but what I did at Brentwood. We would have Wednesday night for 2 hours evangelism training for 4 weeks. And we would do that for 4 weeks at a time. And we would practice and go over it and study for 4 weeks. But part of the time was teaching. The other part of the time was practice. And that's what I've been a little bit frustrated here. There's been no practice time. And without any practice time, nothing's gonna happen. And so we'll move in that direction a little bit, not every Wednesday, but every once in a while we'll move over to a practice time. Now I did this over at Bell Road Baptist Church with a couple of guys. And they would come in. I said, now you gotta get your story down to 1.5 minutes. And they would read the story several times in the Bible, and then we'd come on Wednesday night, and then they would tell the story. Now, one of the fellas, I'm gonna bring him over here. I already asked him if he would come and do his story. His famous story is feeding the 5,000. I think I mentioned that before. That was about 6-7 years ago. He still tells that story on a regular basis. But the first time he told it, I'm almost positive I said this, but he said, Jesus said, this boy, how are we going to feed him? And he said, this boy came here and he said, he's got 5 fries and 2 Big Macs. I said, we can't go quite that far in adapting. That's good that you learn to adapt it a little bit, but we don't need to go that far. And so he would go into McDonald's or any other place, and he's a tall, lanky guy. He did Iron Man. He does close-up magic tricks, so he's got quite a bit of background already. But he would walk into McDonald's. He said, what would you do if 5,000 people came in here and want a hamburger? What would you do? That's how he starts off. But he would do that. And he still does that. I ran into him at Cracker Barrel a couple of years ago in there. He was telling a story. So once you get into a habit, what I found also is that you will get in a habit of telling your favorite story. I don't know what your favorite story would be, but the reason I like Cain and Abel is because it has so much doctrine in it. It has so much, what in the world is he calling me now? But it has so much doctrine in it, and you can explain the full gospel of salvation. And you can tell why people are lost as well. You can go just as far as you want. And I think, Shirley, you were interested in feeding the 5,000. Yeah. Which is a good story. Whatever one you like. The more doctrine you can pour into it, the better off it is. Just find a story and you practice it. And you let me know. And if you don't want to practice here, just come a little early and we'll practice somehow or another. But you got to practice a story. You got to learn how to tell a story, which over the years, storytelling has become a more effective means of evangelism than telling the 5 points. When I was saved, what we used to use is 4 things Jesus wants you to know. First of all, you're a sinner. Second is Jesus died for you. Third is you've got to ask him in your life. And so your first word out of your mouth was, you're a sinner. Now that didn't work out too well. It worked out in one sense because back in the 60s, there was a hunger to know God. So all you really needed to do is tell them how. Now, telling them how is not the first thing you do. You tell them a story, and they can think about it for a long period of time, because the Holy Spirit is going to be working with them 24 hours a day if he's working with them. So that's the reason the story is so important. Any observation on that? Okay, the next thing is what the verse is here in verse 6 and 7 and 8 of 1 Thessalonians. This is the next major thing in life. And this is where the algorithms that you're probably familiar with. I read recently that, well, not recently, a few years ago, that Facebook will track not just your credit score, but they track the credit score of your friends on Facebook. Because if they have bad credit, you're probably gonna have bad credit. If you play golf, if they play golf, you'll play golf. You become like the people you're around. This has been an old statement for years now, that you become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. Bill Glass, football player, years ago, I heard him speak at First Baptist Huntsville. He said, you become like the people you spend the most time with, or the books you read. So if I know what you're like, I also know what your friends are like. And if I was able to get around your friends, then I would know what you're like. Because you associate with the people that you know and are like. That's just a fact of life. And what Paul says here, even more. He said, you became examples to all in Macedonia, Achaia, who believed. Verse 6, I should have read first. You became followers of us. You imitated us. So if I want to know what the last 5 pastors you had, what they were like, all I've got to do is look at you and look at the people that were here. And I would know what the pastors that you had like, because they tell us, and I partly believe it, that after, sometimes the pastors might complain about their church members. I don't know if you ever heard that, but sometimes pastors will complain about their church members. Well, what they don't realize is that after 5 years, the church members have become just like you. They're an imitation of you. They're like you. 5, maybe 6 years. You become like the people you're around, and you become like the pastor you've had. So, as I look at this, I'll be quite blunt right now. I have been able to figure out that the pastors in the past haven't been very evangelistic, haven't been very outreach, at least the last handful of them, because otherwise the church would have gone straight up. So that's a reason it's important when you call a pastor, it's not just important to analyze him, but analyze his friends. What are his friends like? What are the people like? Because they will become like him. Now, I know that that's moving into church growth, and there's a lot of material out there on church growth that I've studied. And so it's one pastor, they back in the 60s or 70s rather, they were really analyzing church growth. And Lifeway and a lot of other people just studying church growth. And they went to this one church and they analyzed the church and they couldn't figure it out. And so Elmer Towns, I don't even know if he's still living or not, but he was the guru of church growth years ago. And so he went to this church and they were talking to the church members, and they said the pastor was average. He went to an average seminary. He was an average preacher. He was an average church administrator. There wasn't anything special about him in the sense of, charismatic, spectacular pastor. Why was this church growing? And so they ran into a deacon and went ask a deacon, and the deacon said, I know what y'all are looking for. I know what y'all are looking for. Y'all are trying to figure out why this church is growing. I'll tell you why. I know our pastor's average on just about everything. But he loves Jesus more than anything, and he's taught us to do the same thing. And Jesus said, if you love me, you will reach other people. And so that is the second thing that my goal is to, and I know you love Jesus. I'm not saying you don't, but you got to have the practicality for it. Now, what he said here, take a look at this. Verse 8. For from you the word of the Lord has sounded forth, not only in Macedonia. I know y'all may not know exactly where Macedonia is, but that's just across the river from where Troas was. In Achaia, but also in every place, your faith towards God has gone out so that we don't need to say anything. Now that should be one of the most disturbing verses in the whole Bible. What would happen if I were to walk up to your neighbor and start talking to him, and I said, Joe next door here is a member. Oh, I know Joe. I know him. I know his faith. I know his commitment to the Lord. I don't need to say anything because he tells me everything. He's already evangelized me. He's already talked to me about the gospel. He already knows everything. So when Paul went to these places, he didn't have to start from scratch. He said, those people that were in Thessalonica, they went all over. And they tell me what it's like. They have already evangelized me. And Paul said, all I've got to do is just tie up loose ends. Now, how would that be if whoever happened to be pastor were to go out and be next door to you and start talking to somebody, and that person starts telling them, oh, I know what they're like. They've got a work of faith, they've got a labor of love, and they've got patience and hope. That's what Paul says up there in verse 3. He said, I know your work of faith, your labor of love, and your patience of hope. So those three characteristics are already part of you. Now, so you become examples. You became an example of everybody. Now, that's what it's going to take to grow this church or any other church. If you have a partnership between a pastor and the lay people, and that it's both in your same page, because it's got to be, you got to be an example to what you're seeing, what you're going. Now you go one step further. An example is not the only thing that works. You've got to have the verbal part. And the verbal part is the storytelling part. And so there's got to be, that's the reason Paul said, Peter said in 2 Peter said, be ready to give a reason for the hope that's in you. But we're going to start very just basic in learning a story, learning a Bible story, because that is I hate to just say it this way, but that's the new, most effective way of evangelism. But really, it's not new. It's the way it was, and that's what Stephen did before he was stoned to death. He told a story of Israel coming out of being called. He told the whole story. Yeah. You want to see a story? He started back from zero. He went all the way to Jesus, and so that's one good story. Start with zero, but sometimes you don't have quite that much time. Well. Time's up. Any question? I hope. I've been putting this off for a long time, being this blunt. But it's got to be not somebody else going to do it, regardless of where you go. You can do this. I remember going out with a lady in Brazil. I said, let's go out and talk to somebody. And she was very reluctant. She did not want to go out to share the gospel. And when we got back, now there's a phrase that they use there that maybe translate. But when we got back, I said, well, She said, man, this evangelism wasn't the Bishu that I thought it was. No, Bishu is a monster.
Oh.
I said it wasn't the monster that I thought it was. It wasn't as bad it wasn't as hard as what I thought it was gonna be. And that happened to me 2 or 3 times when I went out with people. And one other lady, she said, I've never seen anybody witness before in my life. It's not near as hard as what I thought it was gonna be. Would you spend all night in prayer if you're gonna tell the story of the 3 bears to your grandkids? You know, hey, you know, I'm gonna have to tell the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. I'm so nervous, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have a heart attack. I'm scared to death what they're gonna do. Well, telling the gospel is easier than that. There's less words in it. It's a less complicated story. And so the biggest thing is just to overcome the fear. It's not complicated. It's not hard. It doesn't take a little work, yeah, but it's not hard. And so when there's a partnership between, Paul said, you are the partner, all I've got to go in there is tie up the loose ends. And then we'll reach everybody. We reach the whole area. Okay, so anyway, Jason will be here next week. Ask him anything you want to ask him. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for our time together. And Lord, give us the boldness and the courage to be able to pray for people and to pray for opportunities as they come up. And give us wisdom and understanding to be able to explain clearly the gospel. For we pray in Christ's name. Amen.